I was so excited about offering our children the freedom to not be as bored as I was through my educational years. The high school years were my favorite years of homeschooling the kids, and the most exciting of seeing their exponential growth during those years and the fruit of all those years of training that I had done. It was really fun. You have been faithful, and that God has equipped you to be the most effective teacher for these children that He has given you, and to believe that and embrace that, and therefore have peace and joy in the journey. You make sure the aroma of Christ is in your home. It's not a candle, it is the very essence of having a home that is filled with the character of Christ.
God is the superintendent of our education. Welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast, Thriving in Your Homeschool. Before we get started, I want to thank BJU Press Homeschool for sponsoring this podcast and for the wonderful curriculum, resources, and support they provide to homeschooling families. And as we head into a new school year, there's so much to think about. Choosing the right curriculum, building schedules and routines, planning activities, and creating an environment where our children can truly thrive. And as we make those plans, it's also important to remember the relationships, character, and spiritual growth that are being shaped right alongside their education. Today, I'm joined by my dear friend and veteran homeschool mom, Jan Smith. Jan and her husband, Roger, homeschooled all 4 of their children in the midst of a thriving medical practice from beginning to end, and she brings such valuable perspective from the other side of the journey. We're talking about recognizing your children's unique gifts, making time for character training, finding a rhythm that works for your family, and trusting that God has equipped you for the children He has given you. If you're headed into this year excited, overwhelmed, or somewhere in between, I think this conversation will be a real encouragement. Well, I'm so happy to have my dear friend Jan with me today. Jan, thanks for being here.
I'm thrilled to be with you, Zan.
And so y'all have had a busy summer traveling and speaking. Where's the last place you got back from on the homeschool circuit?
We spoke at Chia in California at their state conference, and it was a little different for us in that we got to speak several times on the end of the journey and launching, ready, set, launch, and then dealing with children, adult children. And so that was fun for us because that's really where we're at now. And hopefully we were able to encourage a lot of the parents, and anyway, it was a lot of tears this time in those sessions. It was fun.
Yeah, that's true. As we get started, tell people how you and Roger started in your homeschooling journey and about when that was.
Well, when Roger was in medical school, right after we graduated from college in 1980, we had a couple that moved from Oregon, and they were homeschooling their children, and we'd never heard of that term or that concept. And so we were very impressed with their children, and really, they were just delightful. They were open-hearted, they were secure, they were happy, they were knowledgeable, and we said, we want children like that.
Now, did you say 1980?
Well, we graduated in 1980, so this was about in about 83 that we met these kids.
You had never heard of homeschooling, but you saw the kids, you saw the product before you ever thought about the concept, which is pretty powerful.
Yes, yes. And I still feel that those people who not just know about homeschooling, but know homeschooled students, adults that were homeschooled, that they are usually shocked by the caliber, because it all of the misconceptions and it's almost like memes of what we think homeschoolers look like. It's not real. It's not real. And so
Because
it's really exciting.
it's counterintuitive in our culture that these kids who are being raised at home, mainly by their moms, are turning out to be such gifted, articulate, multi-talented kids. You socialize, well socialized. You don't expect it. I've talked to several college administrators and admissions personnel who've said they're just so shocked by the way these homeschool kids, kind of burst onto campus and they still have intellectual vitality because they're not burned out. And they said, but the thing that really kills us is how they come on campus and they take leadership positions and they socialize. They really weren't expecting that. So it really is a great way to raise kids. So how many kids do you and Roger have?
We have 4, and they all went to college. They were all shocked when they got to college how these kids, even though they were at a university, didn't want to learn. They just wanted to pass the test.
Your kids were shocked at the other kids. Okay.
Yes, they were rather mortified. They'd be given a class assignment to work in a team, and they were used to doing that at co-ops and other things. And they were excited about, to be able to be creative and really do it with excellence. And the other kids were like, let's just get it done. They didn't want to do anything. They weren't thinking outside the box. And so I think it was a real shock to our children when they got to college, just how well educated they were, because they were the first wave of homeschoolers like your kids were. And, it was an experiment. It was a grand experiment, and it was by faith journey that you and I took. And now it's been proven this works. It works on every level. For any parent that's committed to their children, homeschooling works. And so, for those moms that we're talking to out there that are starting maybe for the first year ever, or going back and thinking, am I really ruining my kids? You're not. If you're being faithful before the Lord to love and to lead your children and to the best you can to teach those children what you've got in front of you, then, God takes it and multiplies it. And he said, if we seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, that all these things shall be added to you. So we can't really say exactly how it works, but we can say with confidence, it works.
That is for sure. Amen. So how long did you and Roger homeschool? Did you homeschool all of your kids, kindergarten through high school?
We homeschooled all of ours from the very beginning to the very end. And there was a point when my oldest was, like in junior high, and I got scared. And I had started off with real confidence because I thought I can handle kindergarten. And I was so excited about offering our children the freedom to not be as bored as I was through my educational years. And anyway, but the older they got, the less secure I got. And I reached a point where I even thought about putting them in school. And because we were taking it kind of a year at a time, as long as it worked for them and as long as it worked for me. But for some reason, I lost my confidence. And I talked to Roger, and he said, no way. He said, have you looked at these kids? They're amazing. And he said, if you were to die, I would quit my medical practice and home educate these children, because I see so much fruit in the lives of our children. So that gave me the confidence and the re-energized me. And I went back to my kids. I said, y'all got to pray for me, because I'm all you got and you're stuck with me. So let's just suck it up. And we're supposed to do this, and we're going to trust God, and we're going to do the best we can. And I still felt that the high school years were my favorite years of homeschooling the kids, and the most exciting of seeing their exponential growth during those years and the fruit of all those years of training that I had done. It was really fun. It made it hard to let go of those kids in the end because I had a well-trained army, here to
That's
help. They could do all the things.
that's
I had to
that's
hire
right.
help after my kids were grown.
I know. I'll never forget when the boys went off to college and Joe was out of town and we live in the country and I had to go take the trash can to the side of the road. I thought, I didn't sign up for this. I mean, it was, of course, they did lot of, the kids did a lot of heavy lifting for me
They can be quite handy when they are well
yes.
trained.
Yes, and you're like you say, you become a team. And then when they leave, I'll never forget when I can remember crying over a sink when the boys were like 2 and 4, thinking, I'm never going to have my life back again. And it seemed like I blinked my eyes and Ty was 17 and I'm crying over the sink because he's going to visit colleges. And I know young moms get tired of hearing it, but the time flies in the blink of an eye. And you want to really grab hold of those relationships while you have the years and you can do it because the time will come when they're on their own, which is why we're raising them, what we're raising them to be. So let's talk for just a few minutes. A lot of people have already started their school year. I will tell you, I remember the days when we started school the Tuesday after Labor Day, which I feel is a glorious plan. I was on Todd Wilson's website, The Smiling Homeschooler. I love Todd the other day. And he had written an article about don't let people pressure you into losing your summer. Start in September if you want to. So that's whether, some people have been homeschooling all summer long and keeping up, and other people have taken the summer off, and other people are waiting until September. That's the beauty of homeschooling. You have that flexibility built in for what works with your family, your travel. I have friends in Arizona who love to homeschool in September and August. I mean, because it's so hot. They can't do anything else. And then the nice months they have in December and January, they can just take off. And so, that's the real beauty of homeschooling. So, Jan, if you were going to tell people after all of your years of homeschooling, what is one of the secrets to having a good school year this year?
I think believing in the fact that your children were given to you and that you are the best for them, whether you get insecure or not, that you know your children and you love your children and you will advocate for them and their needs more than any other. So therefore, have peace that, fear and insecurity is what Satan does. He came to steal, kill, and destroy, and that is what he does, is he steals our peace. But Christ said that it's my peace I give to you. And that I think that if you can start and finish with the fact that you have been faithful and that God has equipped you to be the most effective teacher for these children that he has given you, and to believe that and embrace that, and therefore have peace and joy in the journey. I'm serious. It is possible to homeschool, not without conflict, but with peace and with confidence. And that should be your goal. That should be your aim, is to do it in such a way that you can believe in the fact that God has equipped you to best train and teach your children.
I love this quote by Harriet Beecher Stowe's brother, who was a pastor back in the 1800s. He said, the mother's heart is the child's classroom. And so, we're all busy trying to set up classrooms, or for those of you who have been homeschooling for years, it may just be the dining room table and the living room sofa. But, we get all worked up about the classrooms when really, if we guard our heart and we fill our heart with delight for our children, then that becomes the best classroom they will ever know. Another thing you and I have talked about, Jan, a lot in terms of creating an environment for the best school year ever is just to set your kids up for success. And when I say that, what does that make you think of?
Well, like I said, a mother knows her children best, and you've been watching them since they were very young. I always think about Mary and how she hid those things in her heart. She treasured those things in her heart, that she knew good times. She knew who Christ really was. And we see the things that our children do, and we know what their gifts are. So as they grow, I think it's very important to set them up for success by giving them the tools they need. I think about my son that is an artist, and he's really a salesman right now, but he's an artist at heart. And when he was very young, he was playing in the mud in the backyard, and he called me out there and said, "Mom, look." And I looked down at that mud and I said, "What is it?" And he said, "See, it's a rooster." Well, it was a rooster looking up at me. And when he said it, it was like one of those trick pictures. When you see it, you see it, and I looked down at that and I went, "Oh my goodness. How did he create that?" It was a 3D rooster looking up at me, his face. And I just remembered that. And so over the years, we gave him sculpting knives and signed him up in a class. We kept giving him better and better tools. And, he did that in college. But just paying attention to what your children's strengths are and giving them the tools they need to grow in that way. And in terms of an environment, we as ladies, we like to light candles, but I have to go back to the fact that it's not some make-believe feeling that's in your house that have the candles lit and you're sitting on the couch reading a book. But I do believe that when we have the aroma of Christ in our home, that it is a smell, it is a fragrance to God, and that we bring that by first having our hearts right before the Lord. So when you first said setting an environment, I thought, you make sure the aroma of Christ is in your home. It's not a candle. It is the very essence of having a home that is filled with the character of Christ. And, that's going to set us up for success, regardless of what the skill set is for your children. Buying journals for my daughter that's a writer. I've always wanted to be a journaler, and even though she makes these beautiful journals, I'm still not a journaler. But she was, and that was something I always made sure that she had things to write with and to write on that were beautiful, that she loved. Those kinds of things, simple things, paying attention to your kid.
One of the things I love about homeschooling too is I have always felt like, just like you were talking about the aroma of Christ, that God is the superintendent of our education. And Deb Bell, a friend of mine who now homeschooled her 4 kids and now has her PhD and has an online academy, she would always tell me, "Zan, God loves to bless and open doors for our children." And I really do believe we have a superintendent of education who has the power and the contacts and the connections to open all kinds of doors and opportunities for our children. We have talked about, as your children get older, even when they're young, we knew our oldest son was going to make a living with his mouth. He was either going to be a salesman or he was going to be a preacher. And it turns out he's a very successful salesman. He's an auditory kinesthetic learner. He learned by moving and talking, and he's a great salesman, but he also shares the gospel in season and out of season. So he's really done both. I remember when he was a medical device salesman, he said he just often had a chance to just sit down and pray with people in the surgical waiting rooms. And, so it's really a blessing to see our kids grow up and walk in their giftings. And I believe that's one of the things that homeschooling provides for our children in spades, really. It's a great way to to raise our children so that they're in harmony with themselves. That sounds very new agey, but they're not fighting who they are. They can work with how God made them and
And they're not being
understand their.
bullied by somebody for who that is. And don't allow your children to bully one another, because they are going to all be different from one another. And, as adults, I think it's really cool when our kids are friends, because they know each other. A long-term friend, they know you. And there's nothing better than someone that you grew up with. All the stories and examples. I just want to encourage those moms that you don't lose them. All of those foundations that you're building, hopefully they will remain friends for a lifetime, because it really matters. And even though they leave your home, go off to college, and even though they get married and have children of their own, you still don't lose them if you build that relationship well. And that's the emphasis. Accepting each other's strengths and weaknesses. I think a key to successful homeschooling is accepting yourself as a woman and as a person, to believe in who you are, because this is a hard job to homeschool your children and to do all the things that you do as a mom. You've got to believe in yourself. And some of these women that I see that are homeschooling a passel of kids, they could be running a corporation. And that there are some pretty amazing homeschool mamas out there. And some of those of you that we're talking to, you may be one of those. And you've got to believe in yourself that you are going to grow into this job. If you're just getting started, you don't have to worry about high school. You're going to grow. You're going to get better and stronger as a woman. It is amazing how much we grow, how much we learned. Did you learn a lot? I learned a lot.
Oh boy, yes. As we were homeschooling, we learned a lot about the law and politics while we were homeschooling. I learned a lot about soccer and sports. They learned a lot about math. you know, so, so anyway, but it is a great way. One thing I do want to talk about, Jan, is scheduling. And one thing is, you and I have talked over the years. I've heard you say so many times, we need to schedule time in to correct behavior, not feel like that's hijacking the day. Sometimes, as a homeschool mom, you'll feel like you spent the whole day on character building pursuits. How do we get our children to work with? How do we deal with selfishness? How do we encourage this one child who's lagging behind or is going through a hard period or is depressed? All of those things, are worthy of our time during the homeschool day.
Amen, sister. I feel like, especially in those early years, and that's when we're least secure, is in those early years a lot of times, because we want to do it right. We want to be diligent. And I think you should be diligent. But just know that also means being diligent in the training of your children of how to get along and how to correctly care and be kind to one another. So that's as important as the math lesson is, because you got to teach those things early. And so the interruptions felt endless when mine were younger. And, because if you've got 2 kids, then there's going to be squabbling and bickering. If you've got, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or more, it's going to be a lot. So training them early how to resolve conflict, how to express what they feel and what they think about something, that's important. And to learn how to give an actual apology. And kids, they will fight, and then it'll be over, and they'll go outside and they'll be playing, and it's done. That's what we want, is to learn how to meet conflict head on and let it go and move on.
Hey, Jan, one of the things I love the most about you and Roger is y'all would hold court. So tell us about that experience, because I think that is really meaningful, and it sure made an impact on your kids.
It did make an impact. And like I'm talking about when they were between 4, able to talk well, between 4 and 8, especially is when this happened. And they called it family court. I didn't call it that, but they did, because I stood as judge and they had to, they got to express what they felt. And then you know how kids are. They want to go, whoa, whoa, they get and respond quickly and be upset in the other's face. And they had to learn to wait until that person finished. And so my oldest 2 were Caleb and Emily, a boy and a girl. And, Caleb would tend to use physical force and Emily would be brutal with her words, as girls can be. And yet I'd say, when you said that, how did you feel, Caleb? And Caleb would say, and anyway, we would just go back and forth until they were able to understand what led to the conflict and to be able to resolve it and to then understand what they're really apologizing for. And Zan, they said, when they got to college, especially, they would laugh and say they would see friends have a spat. And because they had been forced early on to dissect a conflict back to the origin and realize, oh, when I said this, this is what you felt, and you responded this way. And they then could see it. They were discerning about conflict. And, they would say, I wish I could do that with my friends in college, to say, wait a minute. Now, when she said that, how did that make you feel? And they couldn't do that, of course, but they recognized if people could just be honest about what they felt and say, this is what I heard. Is that what you were saying? This really hurt. When you said that, this is what I felt. And yet, it's just not the way things are done. And yet it was the way it was done in our home, because we had to live together. We couldn't just send them off to school the next morning. We had to sit there. They had to sit there in the same room the rest of the day, So we had to resolve conflicts. And I think it's one of the biggest gifts we give to our children. The thing is I don't know about you, but I have found in my adult life that my daughter has become my counselor many times in a situation, like with the daughter-in-laws or something. She understands my children and me. She knows how I'm thinking. She's an amazing counselor to me now. And it's really dear. All of the children have served as that in my own life.
Yes,
And
that is true. That is true. Your kids do become your friends and your counselors. And it was funny. I can't believe you said that. It just brought back this memory. I can remember the first time Ty called me as an adult. I mean, he was out of college and he was working, and I think my dad was sick, and there were several things going on. And he called me up and he said, Mom, I've just felt this need to pray for you. Tell me what's going on. And he's praying for me over the phone while he's driving between jobs. But it was, it's so sweet. And then you see, like my parents and Joe's parents were all around for the kids when they were homeschooling. Even though Joe's parents really didn't like homeschooling, they still kept the relationship with the kids, which I really appreciated. And they put a lot of time and invested in our kids. And as all 4 of our parents got older, our kids had become adults, and they visited them and took care of them.
yes,
And,
yes.
John became
Because they knew them. They had time to really know
that's
those
right.
people.
And so I would say, I was talking to Suzanne Nunn this morning about a project we're working on together. She's the president of Florida, FPEA in Florida, and runs that huge conversation or convention. And I said, Suzanne, what's your one advice to homeschool moms today as they are getting into their new school year? She said, always put the relationships first. Relationships come first. Now, I want to hasten to say, first of all, I want to thank BJU Press Homeschool for being the sponsor of this podcast, being so committed to the homeschooling community through the curriculum they provide that's biblical and educationally robust and geared to learning style. all those things. I appreciate that so much about BJU Press, but they're also very committed to the homeschooling community through the things they sponsor and the events they run. Everything they do to me just
They've been
smacks of
invaluable
loving.
here in Louisiana. They have been faithful to support our state organization and the events we run.
And I love them. And I love curriculum. Having said all that, the relationship, if the relationship comes first and it's foundational, our relationship with our children, our husbands, our relationship, especially with the Lord, then you've got that to build onto as you move into the book work as they get older and older. And to me, it just gives education the most powerful context possible. My mom was a public school teacher, and she would always say, Zan, even though when I started homeschooling in 1984, nobody knew anything about it, including me. But mom said, as a public school teacher, if I understood every child like you understand your children, if I had that permanent record on each one of my children, which is what the teachers used to call a permanent record that passed from teacher to teacher to teacher on each child, she said, the sky would have been the limit in terms of what I could have accomplished. And so it is the relationship, and you want that relationship to be intact as much as possible when your children leave home.
Absolutely. It starts young and it continues on, making those conversations and that relationship a priority. But I think the original question you asked me was about a schedule and to incorporate time for that.
Yes.
So with that statement that it is worth taking time out to do training, but that to start off with a typical schedule so kids know what routine. And I like the way that it's often referred to as a loop schedule, that instead of scheduling out every single 15 minutes, that my kids knew that we were going to start with Bible study, and then we would have breakfast, and we did cleanup. And then I like to tackle the hardest things early in the day. And so we would do math and reading. If I had one that was learning to read, which it seems like if you've got several children, there's always someone learning to read. And that we would do that early in the day while the older ones were doing math and some of their grammar stuff like that. So anything that had to do with something that took a good bit of brain power, we would try to do that early in the day, take a recess, and then come back and do a read aloud of some sort. So they got to either play on the floor or do a puzzle or do something while I was reading aloud. I learned early on, I knew from myself that you can listen and do something else. And I still do that when I'm cooking or cleaning or mowing or weeding, anything that I'm doing here at the house. I've always got a book going. So anyway, we would do some read alouds, and in the afternoon I tried to do a unit study that incorporated history and science and geography, that type of thing. We did that in addition to their piano practice and taking care of their animals and all of that stuff we did in the afternoon.
Well, that's the beauty of homeschooling, isn't it? Is that you have plenty of time for your schoolwork, and then there's so much time left over for real life activities. Your kids had a business and they rode horses. They did so many things. Our kids did sports. Lizzie did the fine arts in theater, and we were all involved more than we wanted to be in legislative and legal issues. And so, it is a full life. And I think it's so important for your children to see how you live life. Like, for instance, Jan, talk about some of the events you ran while you were homeschooling and how that impacted your kids.
Well, early on, I did. Roger was involved with scouting, and that is something that was a fun part of our boys' all the way through their early high school years and Eagle Scout and all of that. And, that would be equivalent to trail life now. I did children's musicals at church. And because I wanted them to have those experiences. And as moms, if we want something for our children, then oftentimes we're the ones that end up having to do it, And so that involved coaching softball, other baseball, other things that the kids did a lot of different sports, but they didn't do it all at one time or all in the same year necessarily. But there's a place for the extracurricular activities that we incorporated as part of their school idea, that it is learning life skills, a lot of these things. If the boys had scout badges that they were working on, first aid or something like that, we incorporated that as part of our school because I wanted them to learn those things, But as they got older, we did 4-H.
Yep, and speech and debate.
And so I ran tournaments and things like that. And I laugh thinking about one of my sons. He asked me one day when I was in the throes of right before a speech tournament and I was recruiting judges, and I had a notebook that I would take notes every year as I was talking with all of these professional people that I didn't know from Adam, but I was calling in the area where the tournament was going to be, so they would come in and serve as a judge for the speeches or the debates that they were doing. So I talked with a lot of people, and I would keep notes from year to year. And this one particular person, I was asking them about their mother and her surgery, and saying that I prayed for her last year. And after I hung up from this particular person, my son, who'd been listening at the door to my conversation, he asked me, he said, "Mama, how long have you known that person?" I said, "I've never met them." And he said, "And you just talked to them like you were old friends?" And I said, "Well, we are friends. I just haven't met them yet." So I think we would be friends if I knew them. And he laughed. And do you know that he ended up in his sales, he had to do tons of cold calling. And at a time when I felt I was neglecting the education of my children, I was actually patterning for him a valuable skill
How to make a
that
cold
he
call.
has utilized
Right.
and has made a lot of money doing it. And yet I wasn't being paid. We were just putting on a tournament,
Right.
And so I think that as women, we need to remember that we are growing as we love and serve our kids and stepping up to fill the needs that are there for them, whether that's directing a children's musical or, organizing a whole tournament or helping with a play, whatever it is that we end up doing, coaching a team, that we are learning and growing as individual women. And there's a lot of life after homeschooling to live, where those professional level skills that we are accruing as we homeschooling, that God has a plan for us as well as for our children. And so any young mom that's out there that is feeling the pressure to provide financial recompense for their family, that I just encourage you just to be at peace, that God will meet the needs of your family and you continue to grow and learn and trust Him for the income that's needed. And I'm not saying it's a sin to try to provide extra, but I think it's a pressure that society is putting on us, that in order for us to have value and worth, it needs to have a financial situation associated with that. And I just don't think that's true. Nobody ever paid you for making a state law for South Carolina and setting precedents across the country. I don't remember there being a check involved in that, Zan.
True.
But yet it impacted people all over the country. So the things that we do for our children, you were doing that for your children.
That's right.
And
That's right.
there are things that all of us as women step up to the plate and do for our children to meet needs that they have and to provide opportunities. And, if you hadn't done that yet, moms, if you're listening, more than likely God's going to call you to do something to meet the needs of your children, and He will equip you to do that. And it's probably not going to, you're probably not going to be paid for it in the end. But we reap a harvest by what our children benefit from those things. So our children benefited by participating in those speech and debate tournaments in the early years of NCFCA. And yet, they also gained skills that they are benefiting from in their professional lives now.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, one thing I just want to encourage moms with is not to grow weary in well-doing, because there are going to be very few days, especially when your children are very young, that your kids are going to wake up and say, Mommy, thank you so much for laying your life aside to homeschool me and cook these meals and teach me and keep the house clean and not play tennis with your friends and not go to lunch with your friends. And, you're not going to get a lot of that feedback. And Jan and I were talking about this last night a little bit as we were preparing for the podcast. One of the memories I have is because I felt like one of my jobs was to be a cheerleader for my kids. And I wanted them both to be able to speak publicly. That was important to me. So from the very beginning, when they would do book reports, we'd have a little dinner with our families or our grandparents. I mean, nothing formal, or I'd have them stand up and pretend like there was a crowd, and how would you approach this? But I was always saying, even when they were little, 7 and 9 and 8 and 10, I'd say, oh, that was so good. I love this point you made. I loved how you handled this. Well, one day I woke up and I was just tired of giving all this encouragement to two little boys who acted like they could care less. So they gave their book reports and they went upstairs. And Ty came back downstairs, the oldest. He was probably 9. And I said, where's John? And he said, well, he's upstairs crying his eyes out. And I said, why is he crying? I said, why is he crying his eyes out? Because this is so funny. He's imitating me. He says, because usually, Mom, you say, oh, honey, that's so good. And I love this point. And you're so smart. And you looked at him and said, thank you, John. What's he supposed to do but cry his eyes out? You need to go apologize to John. So, you don't realize that what you're saying to your children matters, because they're not going to always have the grid or take the responsibility to say, thank you, Mom. And I do think that how we treat them is important. And our encouragement of them is important. And don't grow weary in that.
I couldn't agree more. And sometimes, even though now homeschooling it's more cool, it's more acceptable, it's not as weird as it used to be, but there's still that hint of foolishness in the eyes of the world. This whole idea of motherhood, even, much less homeschooling. Like, you've gone way out there when you're homeschooling. And I remember with Emily, my daughter, when she was in high school, hearing that I just happened to kind of learn it through the grapevine that the teachers in the hall were talking about poor Emily because she couldn't even be a cheerleader. That there's still that, even though we had tremendous opportunities that she was doing by the time she was in high school. I just want to encourage those moms that may feel like they're viewed as a little bit foolish and that they need that validation, because in the world's eyes that, children are a hindrance to our careers, that we could be doing, like going to lunch, having those corporate dinners and doing these things that give us feedback and validation, because children aren't going to do it. Maybe when they're grown, they will, but as they're growing up, there's very little validation for the work that we do. And children are a gift from God, and it is a long-term investment. So, I struggled with the idea that all of those years that you do lay aside that you're investing in your children, that it's kind of a reduction of impact that you could be having because you feel like, I don't know, I always kind of felt like I was tucked aside in our little bubble, and yet now that I have these powerful adult children, I realized it was an expansion of my influence. It wasn't a reduction of that. And, even the idea of marriage is viewed for us as women as you don't need that man. And yet God says that two are stronger than one. And it just is really, it's just crazy the ideas that society has toward children and marriage. All of it, even sexual relationships, they feel like, don't be bound to just one person. And yet all the studies show that a happily married couple, they live longer, they're healthier, they have better sex. All of the things are stronger in a marriage relationship. So the things that the world says is foolish, that it's really wisdom from God. And that these years of you laying aside what the world says is of value and of importance is a holy investment in your children. And if you don't grow weary in well-doing, you will reap. I love the verse in Hebrews that says, therefore, do not throw away your confidence, for with it brings a great reward that after you have done the will of God, you will receive what was promised. And so,
Jan, that is powerful. As a matter of fact, I was going to ask you if you had a verse you wanted to share in closing. So read that to us one more time. Share that with us.
Therefore, Hebrews 10:35, therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward, for you have need of endurance, so that when you've run the will of God, you may receive what was promised.
Amen. So
and I think that is the peaceful fruit of righteousness in our children. Not a guarantee, but that all of the training, all of the loving, all of the teaching, what they're going to remember is how you made them feel, and that confidence that comes in their lives as a result of all the cheerleading that you've done, all the encouragement, the requiring, the holding their feet to the fire and feeling like, I don't know if this is making any difference. It is. Keep on keeping on.
Well, Jan, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Well, my husband and I have a website at rogersmithmd.com. And you could sign up for us to come and speak at any event that you have. I do Bible teaching for churches, and we speak at homeschool conferences. And, I would just love for you to reach out. If there's something that we've said today that you would like to talk about further, you can reach us at rogersmithmd.com.
And as always, you can reach me at zantyler.com and on social media. We so appreciate your being here with us today. Know that we often pray for you, pray for your homeschool year, your homeschool journey, the impact you're having on your children and the culture for what you're doing. And we pray that God will continue to bless you in your homeschool journey. Thanks, and until next time, bye.